request here. So http://localhost. Our app, you can see 3000 default. Default, it is using the port number 3000. For example, in this later, I will show you detail. He is requesting some home like this. Or say he is requesting like login, right? This is the request from the client, and the request will come to processing pipeline. We call it as HTTP processing pipeline. In the server, all the requests will be managed by a processing pipeline. Who will manage in the processing pipeline? Who will manage? That is actually managed by a HTTP handler. We usually have a HTTP handler. This HTTP handler is responsible for handling the request and the response. So whatever the request made by client, it will be processed, and whatever response generated by server, it will be sent to client. All the request and response will be managed by this handler. Actually, handler handles a lot of things. So that is why I said it is high level design, because internally what handler does so much. Actually, handler have so many things. So handler uses, it contains header details. So it contains content type. That means actually, I will better give here as, yeah, it will contain request header. So it will contain the content type. So many details will be there. I will not go that much in depth about that internally. So first I will give a high level overview. That means actually what request header will do. Any idea? In general web applications, request header is it is actually responsible for identifying what the request is. Request header is responsible for identifying what the request is and what content type to be delivered. That means actually request header will use status code like 200, like 404, right? These are called status codes. So we have status codes, status text, everything will be handled, right? That means the processing pipeline. So in the processing pipeline, so we have this HTTP handler, which is managing the requests. This much enough as of now, right? Now, how it will deliver the response? That means how it is going to deliver the response. Actually, now you have your React application here. That means we have a React application. We have a React application. And this React application is having some components. Let's keep this little bit. Yeah. So we have a React application, and this React application is having some components. That means it is having register component. It is having login component. It is having home component. Like this, we have components. So we have components. So it is having components. It is having the components. So React application is having the components. So it is having these components. So now what happens in these components? Yeah. See, now what happens here is these components must be loaded and they need to be delivered to the client. Then generally every React application maintains a table we call as a route table. Every React application maintains a route table. It maintains a route table. This route table, actually it is a route table is actually a virtual static table. It is a virtual static table. So what this route table contains, actually, this route table contains information about the path, and it contains information about the component, the path and the component. That means this route table contains information about the path and component. Path and component means on which request path, which component to deliver. That information is present inside this table. That means, let me give this as a table only so that you can understand. We have a path and we have component. We have path and component. That means on this particular path, which component to deliver. Suppose you say login is the path, /login, okay? And on this path, what to deliver? We have to deliver login component. Login component, that is the table. So whatever data is there, means whatever components are available, the components related information is present inside this route table. Now, generally what happens whenever you make a request, when you make a request, the request will come to handler. Handler will send this request. It will send this request to a routing engine. We have a routing engine. This handler is going to send request to a routing engine. It will send the request to a routing engine. So every web application have a route engine. These days, every web application is using routing techniques. We will learn about routing in a separate concept. In single page applications, routing is a technique. Actually, so many techniques are there. As I told you yesterday, I told you like model binding. Model binding is a technique. We have routing is a technique. Caching is a technique. State management is a technique. Management is a technique. Web applications are incomplete without implementing these techniques. Whatever technology you may be using, it is a web application, then it have to address all this. Every web application contains model binding, routing, caching, state management, which are very major things. So routing is a technique introduced into web applications in the recent times. Earlier, we were not using much routing. Now routing introduced into all technologies. What is advantage is it creates user-friendly, SEO-friendly URLs. User-friendly, SEO-friendly URLs. So that user can access easily any content directly by querying from URL. I don't know from how many years you are using internet, but in the early days of internet, do you know I have still my diary? So old diary, several years back diary. In the diary, I have noted down some list of website addresses. Right? Website address list. That means some important websites that we visit for our daily requirements. We used to carry that diary with to a cyber cafe, internet point, open the diary, see the address and type. Because we don't have Google-like search engines at that time. In the early 90s, we don't have those Google search engines. So because internet widely spread all over here in India from 95-96 onwards, people started using internet in India, right? We have to get, suppose in Hyderabad, if I want to use internet, the seized line comes from Chennai. That means no internet service provider here. That means from Chennai, a line should come, cable line should come to Hyderabad, right? That means very complicated. And when I type any address wrong, then it will simply say not found. It will not give any suggestions. It will not show me the correct path where to go. That means I have to type exact path. Now these days browsers are linked with search engines. You type spelling mistakes also, it will say, are do you mean this? Right? This is because of routing. And in early days of YouTube, if you have used YouTube in the beginning, first time when YouTube came, right? That means after Orkut, they have released this YouTube. You know, before Facebook, we have Orkut. Orkut is very popular social networking. After that, Facebook became popular. Right? Before Facebook, we have Google group called Orkut. Orkut is very popular actually. So what happens is when YouTube came in the beginning, we used to suppose I searched for a video on YouTube. I spent 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, and finally I found one video. What the video I am looking for. So I forgot to bookmark it. And I want to show the same video to my friend on his laptop some other time. Then again, I have to spend all the time because I forgot where the category is. Now these days, you are searching for any particular video, then it will recommend all similar type of videos, analytics, intelligence, right? And not only that, suppose you are shopping something on Amazon and you just browsed them, close and come to YouTube. In YouTube, you will find advertisements for them, right? How come YouTube? See, YouTube doesn't know directly, just only see in advertisement, how the advertisement see the intelligence of advertisement. It will show exactly the product you searched. How come they know exactly the content I watched in a website? Getting my address URL is okay. From history, they can grab it. From history, they can get that information about which site I visited. But in that site, what I watched, that is too much, right? In that site, what I watched also, they can access. That is because of routing. That is the reason these days web applications routing is a very important technique to implement, which you will learn in React, how routing works. So React application uses routing. Routing is responsible for serving the contents to the requests. Whatever requests are made, it will serve. And that is the reason we need a routing engine. So routing means while working with web applications, you will come across with compiler. You will come across with routing engines. You will come across with browser engine. Am I right? In the beginning, I told you browser engines. You will come across with view engines. These are very popular. Every web technology person need to know this, that you have a compilers, you have routing engines, browser engines, and view engines. Routing engine responsibility is to identify the path requested by client is available in the route table or not. Right? It will verify whether the path requested by the client is available in the route table. So what view engine will do? View engine is responsible for converting the server side output into HTML. View engine is responsible for converting the server side output. That means actually it is responsible for server side output into HTML. Actually, there are so many view engines like Ivy is a view engine, Razor is a view engine, Spark is a view engine, Naml is a view engine, Django also is a view engine. Django is a framework. There is an engine by name Django, Python based actually. Django is also a view engine, Naml. These are view engines. Actually, different server side. For example, actually what happens, we have PHP. we have JSP, we have ASP.NET, so many. Now they design interface. UI is designed server side, understood? They design interface server side, which need to be converted into HTML. Because whatever they written server side is not understandable to browser. It need to be converted into HTML. That is done by view engine. That is done by view engine. That means, for example, different technologies use different view engines. The responsibility of the view engine is, it is responsible for converting the output into HTML, server side output into HTML. That is the responsibility of the view engines. Routing engine, mapping to the path, identifying whether that component is available or not. Browser engine, you know, I told you the cycle in the beginning. Browser engine, what it will do? Convert the characters to binary, binary to characters, characters to node, nodes to layout, layout to render, render to paint. Everything is done by whom? Browser engines. Web application requires all this, and very important, now compiling and routing and rendering output, everything in our React is managed by Babel. Different technologies have different compilers, different engines, but Babel is one enough for all of them. It is enough for all of them. That means Babel is going to handle all. That means it's not just a compiler, right? It have internally routing engines, view engines, which are responsible for converting the output and handling. That is very important. You should know, right? So technically in React, now what happens is, when client makes a request and this request will come to web server, it will be processed by the handler, and after that it will verify. So by using routing engine, whether it is available in the route table. If it is available in the route table, now this React application have to load this component. Understood? The whatever component is requested by the client. That means now what have to do is, React application have to load this component. React application have to load this component. And very important, after this component, so in order to load this component and deliver its data to the output, right? It will undergo several phases. That means every component will have to undergo several phases. From the time it is requested, right? And when it requested means, as of now, think that it is loaded. From the time it is loaded to the time it is unloaded. That means when it unload, I finished using login, I went to home. That means this login component will unload, and which component will load? Home component will load. That means from the time the component loaded till it is unloaded, it will undergo several phases that we call as component lifecycle hooks. Generally that we call as component lifecycle. That means when a component is loaded, till it is unloaded, it will undergo several phases. Now what generally happens, the component is loaded. That means React app. So React app, so it loads. So it loads. Temporarily I'm giving loads component. It loads the component. But actually how it technically works, that means every component loaded. This is the basic structure. Let me show you this. This is the basic architecture. That means the request comes, and now what happens after it is loaded? the response will go back, right? That means it will send that response through the routing engine request and response, and the response comes back to the client. That means that will be delivered to the client. This is what as a response. And as I already told, I hope you already know, response can be HTML response, it can be file response, it can be JSON response, right? Response can be in various types. That means response, it's not like always it is HTML, right? Response can be anything. It can be a HTML response, a file response, or a JSON response. So this is the basic high level. This is the basic high level it works. So I hope up to this clear, simple. That means you make a request, comes to web server use the handler. Through the handler, it will send the request to routing engine. Routing engine will verify whether that available or not. If not available, it will send 404 saying that not found. If it is available, now it have to load that component into memory. Load that component into memory. That means now what happens is, this diagram I will upload. So life cycle, okay. This diagram I will upload. Okay, fine. Now what happens is, after this is done, after we have done, that means the stages I will define here. Yeah, these are all options. That is the high level architecture. Okay. Now what you have seen here is the component life cycle. Component life cycle starts. Component life cycle starts. So when the component is created, and loaded by application. Understood? Component lifecycle starts when component is created and loaded by application. First, component need to be created. After creating the component, it is loaded. So component is created and component is loaded by application. After creating and loading application, component life cycle comprises of three phases. Component life cycle contains three phases. So one phase is mounting phase. Another phase is updating phase. Another phase is unmounting phase. The component lifecycle comprises of three phases: the mounting and the updating and unmounting. Three phases. That means entire component lifecycle contains three stages actually. That is three stages. And why we have to learn these phases, I will tell you. Detailedly we will discuss. That means what is the necessity of this? That means remember, every component life cycle happens for the component implicitly, internally. That means internally every component is undergoing this. What is meant by mounting? Here I will show you, right? Actually, that means three phases will be there. One is the mounting phase. Another one is updating phase. Another one is unmounting phase. Three phases will be there. What happens in the mounting phase? That means actually what happens in the mounting phase? Generally, the mounting phase contains options like, here just options I will give you. Actually, component will mount. We will have like component did mount. So component will mount and component did mount. Just outline I am giving, right? Internal features also we will see first. In the mounting phase, component will mount and component did mount. Whatever will mount indicates that, so it is allocating memory for the component. That means whatever memory required for handling the contents inside the component, the memory need to be allocated. That is will mount. After component is mounted, that component need to be rendered. So that happens on did mount. Did mount. That means in did mount, what it means, it's finished. That means it will use the render. That means what will happen is component will render the output finally. So memory is allocated and it is rendered. That means the memory allocated and it is rendered. That is mounting phase basically. In mounting phase, component memory is allocated. After that, the component is rendered. Next, what happens in the updating phase? Actually, in the updating phase, it will get the properties. That means it will get the properties. It will set the state. That means storing values into state, accessing the values from the state, configuring the state. Everything will happen in which phase? Updating. In updating phase, it sets the state, it stores value into state, identifies the changes. Updating is nothing but once the component is rendered, it will identify changes. That means what will happen here? Event binding will happen. Am I right? So style binding will happen. So class binding will happen. Class binding will happen. Model binding will happen. All these things will happen inside this updating phase. So once component is mounted and it is rendered, if you start interacting with it, you are doing any changes, then it is called as update. What is meant by class binding, data binding, am I right? All these will happen here. That means what is meant by these already you know. That means it identifies that some button is clicked and it will perform certain functionality. These all activities are performed in updating phase. After updating, it will undergo unmounting. That means after updating, one more will happen. Every time after updating, whatever changes are there, those changes need to be rendered again. Understood? After updating, whatever changes are there, so those changes need to be updated. That means whatever changes are there, these need to be rendered again. That means render is the thing which happens after mount. It will happen after update. After update. After rendering, now it's done everything. Now some other component is requested. When some other component is requested, this component have to unmount. What happens in unmount phase? Actually, unmount phase. In unmount phase, generally what it will do is, it will unregister the options, right? That means it will unregister the options. What is unregistering? That means what it will do is, first it will unsubscribe. It will unsubscribe to events. It will unsubscribe to events. That means actually I told you event uses a subscribe mechanism. Remember the definition? In events, I told you what is event? Event is a message sent by sender to its subscriber. Event is subscribed to a method. That means whatever methods are linked to the events, those are unsubscribed. That means it will disconnect. On click, handle click. So on change, handle change. It will disconnect them. That means it will unsubscribe to all the events. After unsubscribing to all the events, what it will do is it cleans up memory. That means whatever the memory allocated for the component, it will clean up the memory, deletes, and it will load the next component. That is the reason I hope you already learned. I told you na previous session. I hope you already learned that is the reason HTTP is a stateless protocol. Am I right? Is a stateless protocol. So we call HTTP as a stateless protocol. HTTP is a stateless protocol. That means it finished using the component. Whatever memory allocated for the component is destroyed. It's done. Now next component comes and it wants to use the data of previous component. It is not available. It is not available. That is the reason. So the web developers have to depend on various state management techniques. By using state management techniques, they can keep the data and make the data available across components. Various state management techniques are there required because in any web technology, HTTP is stateless. Because all web applications are using which protocol? HTTP. And HTTP 100% stateless protocol. If it is a stateless protocol, every web technology in the world needs state management techniques. State management techniques to transport data from one component to another. So what are such state management techniques? So many state management techniques are there. Like we can use local storage, we can use cookies, we use sessions. Right? We call session object, we call as application objects. By using session objects, we have location cookies object, application objects. We can manage the state. And very important is React based applications. They can use local storage. They can use local storage with the help of JavaScript. But cookies, sessions, applications, they need third-party libraries. They need third-party libraries. That means to manage state, they have to depend on another third-party library. That is the reason the third-party library very popular is Redux. Very popular third-party is Redux, right? That is because many people are not aware of this. Generally, they ask, will you teach React with Redux? Right? Because Redux is not related to React. Redux is not related to React. So Redux is a JavaScript state management library. It can be used in every JavaScript application where you need to handle state. It is not related to React. It is used in Angular, React, Vue, or any technology which is JavaScript based. Only the point is people who learn at JavaScript level, they don't learn about state management. Right? But in general JavaScript also, you can learn such libraries. But learning JavaScript, you will end with events, statements, functions, language, and all. You will not spend time, or there will be no time to discuss about several third-party libraries, right? But if you have learned those libraries at JavaScript level, then it is not a concept to learn in React or Angular or some other technologies. But 100% nobody trains you in JavaScript state management. Maximum they can tell you cookies. Maximum they can tell you about local storage. That is the reason when you come to advanced technologies, you should have a good knowledge of state management. That is the reason in real-time projects also, Redux becomes a good state management library, because Redux itself is state management library, right? That means you can see this component cycle. I will show you. So we have a Redux, yeah. This is Redux. It is a state container for JavaScript apps. State container for JavaScript apps. That means For any JavaScript app, you can use it. It is not only for React. It is not only for React. But when you are working with React or when you are working with Angular, just the way of you import, the way of you write the syntax little change. However, the main syntax will be similar, main methods will be same, but only the way of importing and configuring will little change. Otherwise, everything same. So we will see how to use these state containers, right? But what is the basic flow here? That means three phases are there for every component. One is mounting, another one updating, another one unmounting. What happens in mounting phase? Memory is allocated for component and rendered. Component is rendered, output is rendered. What happens in updating phase? Event binding, data binding, style binding, class binding, and rendering. Everything happens in update phase. What will happen in unmounting phase? Unsubscribe to events, clean the memory, and unload the component. And unload the component. Unload component. So all this happens in unmounted. The component is unmounted. Now tell me why we need these mounting and unmounting phases. Where we have to use them. Updating, okay. Updating is required because event binding, class binding, everything happens in updating phase. As a developer, tell me where we need mounting and unmounting phases. Because unmounting, automatically it will unsubscribe, cleans up memory and unload. Here what you can do means already these phases are working in the background. Developer can write logic for these phases also. Now tell me what is the necessity for a developer to write something for these phases which are already working. What do you think? Understood? Question understood? That means I am saying that already these phases are working. Why should a developer should write them again? For what kind of functionality they have to write? For just example is like every class have a constructor, right? Then why should I write a constructor explicitly? Even you don't write a constructor, there will be a constructor. Then why should I write a constructor? That means already constructor is doing certain tasks. In addition to that, I want some more tasks to perform. I want application to perform some more tasks. Then we will write our explicit constructor. Already constructor is doing. So at that time, I want some more actions to be performed. Then we will write manually. That means even you don't write these methods, all these methods are working for a component. Then why should we write these methods to handle additional functionality? Like what? For example, like what? That means what we need actually. This I will give detailed diagram also, no worry. What additionally you need? For example, suppose you see here. Suppose we have some database. That means we are working with database or something. We have like database or we have like API, something. Now our application have a component. In this component, we are having operations like insert, like update, like delete, like operations are there. Now what should happen is in order to insert, update, delete or anything, that means our component have to manage these tasks. But in order to manage these tasks, what our component first have to do is, first it should connect with the database. Understood? Connect with the database. That means whenever component is ready, I want a connection to be get ready. Understood? That means I want a connection to be get ready whenever the component is loaded, whenever component is ready. Then where we write the connection? Then where we write the connection? So connection with the database must be ready whenever the component is loaded. Then where do we write the connection? That means now we need to write the connection at the mounting phase. Mounting phase means at the time of allocating memory for the component, we will connect with the database. That means after the component is ready, it is connected. You have to just handle the operations like insert, update, delete. That means all other operation. That means this we do on component did mount. Am I right? That means when component will mount, right? That means when memory is allocated, at the time of allocating memory for the component, we will connect with the database. After connecting with the database, inserting, updating, deleting, we will do on which phase? We will do on update. In update phase, we will do all these operations. After doing the operations, now when we are going to another component, then what should happen? When you are going to another component, automatically it should disconnect. Right? When you are going to another component, it should disconnect. It should disconnect. Then where do you write this disconnect? We have to write on which phase? Unmount phase. Understood? Just a simple example I given here. That means as a developer, where we should use this? That means what should I write? Because already unmount is happening. What should I write in unmount? Already it is cleaning up. Already it is deleting the memory. Even if it is cleaning up, even if it is deleting memory, some contents will be in such a way which will be working outside component, because these connections are managed by, I hope you know, ODBC drivers. Am I right? These connections, ODBC drivers will be pulling the connections, you know, they will be pulling the connections. That means you may think like, if I close the component, automatically it will disconnect. No, it will not disconnect automatically. Because generally, as database designers, we pull the connections. Pull the connections means the connections are still opened in the memory. We call this as connection pooling. We call this as connection pooling. That means whenever you are working with database, APIs, connections, so connection pooling is a very important concept. So which allows to reuse the opened connections again without reconnecting. That means connection pooling actually saves round trip. That means no need to connect every time. Already connections are in memory. Our application can use that connection. But that is again, security issues may come. Right? That is the reason open connections can be used by anybody. That is the reason we want to disconnect. That means even you close the component memory is erased, but the component is using some connections which are still active. That is the reason you logged into Gmail without sign out, close the browser. You are still logged in. Am I right? Why? Because your information. Why? Because can you tell? Even I don't sign out. I'm not signing out. Click close button of browser. You are still logged in. Why? Because your credentials are stored in a cookie. And that cookie is outside the component. It is stored in browser memory. It is stored in browser memory. It is stored in your hard disk. It can stay for several days. That means you delete the cookie from the browser memory or from the hard disk. Then again, you have to log in. Till that moment, it is there. That means that memory is outside the component. Then how you will delete? Unmount is not enough. In unmount, you have to tell to delete the cookies. That means while unmounting, it is doing cleanup. That's not enough because some memory it is using outside its scope. How you will manage it? That is all done by using these kind of methods. These kind of methods. This is very important. That means at fresher level, you will not get this much in-depth questions. But at experience level, these kind of questions are very common. Why do I need to write unmount? Right? Because you say that unmount is already cleaning up, then why should I write unmount? So explain one scenario. So why I should write unmount? Why I should write mount? Because already they are doing some work. These kind of scenarios are very important. And if you can explain such scenarios, that's very good. Right? Because you know exactly what it is happening. So that means connection pooling and all actually, I hope you know where it can see ODBC. Yeah, in the ODBC data sources, you can see there is a connection pooling options. Connection pooling. Actually, what is that connection pooling? You see, it allows an application to reuse the open connection handles, which saves round trip from the server. That means a lot of connections are outside your component scope, which it will use. So we need to disconnect, we need to clean them up manually. These are very common in the real world development process. That's the reason we need this event. So lifecycle hooks means component lifecycle contains 3 phases: mounting phase, updating phase, and unmounting. As a developer, you should know why I need mounting, what I should do in mounting, right? I should know what happens in updating and why I should use unmounting. So at high level architecture, this is the basic design actually. This is the basic design. That means here, so this is the mounting phase. This is the mounting phase. In the mounting phase, first, if you are using a class, a constructor will be created. After constructor is created, it will use component did mount. It will mount and it will did mount. After that, it will render, right? Whatever is there, it will render. Now, in updating phase, it will have properties, it will have state. Force update is nothing but it is event binding. Force update is event binding. So event binding allows you to update force. That means you trigger an event and it will update. Without triggering the event also it can update. That actually you saw third-party libraries were doing. Third-party libraries, yesterday you saw, I'm just typing, it is able to verify. Right, without even using the events. That means some force update is already defined in the background. The component is using a force update, which is using those events in the background. We can write events, we can use those events. I will show you this. And it will get the state, it will get the properties, and it will render. That means component did update, means it finished changes. It binded the new values. After that, finally, which will come unmounting phase. In unmounting phase, what will be there? In the unmounting phase, the component will unmount. That means inside it, what happens, I told you. That means inside it, what happens, it will unsubscribe to the events, it will clean the memory, and it will unload the component. This is all the phases of component lifecycle actually. So we have these phases to understand with example. One example we will see how the phases work, right? How these options will work. Actually, first important, another point you should know is, so mounting is nothing but mounting configures. Mounting configures the actions to perform at the time of loading component. at the time of loading component. What will happen? We will have component will mount. It is nothing but it allocates memory. So component did mount. That means it renders view, renders output, renders output. That is component will mount and component did mount. That is the mounting phase. And here we have updating phase. Updating configures the actions to perform. The actions to perform on change detection. Actually, we call as detection, change detection. Change detection means it will be like change detection, which includes event binding, event style, data, class binding techniques. All this will happen there. Not only that, in this, what happens, it have the options like set state. It will have the options like set state. And one more option is we have get state, force update. And another option, actually, it will have get properties. Actually, you have seen in the ready-made component, yesterday you have seen formic component. When you saw formic component, it was using an update method. Formic component was using an update method. Can you guess what it is? Formic get field properties. We saw this now. Get field properties. What this get field properties is doing? That means it is identifying the changes in that particular field. That means what value you entered, what changes you are doing are valid or not. Everything is managed by this get field properties. This belongs to which phase? Updating. That means Formic is using this method as the updating method. That means it is accessing and handling that, right? That is it. And one more option is there. What is that? The option is the last one that is important. Component did mount. Component did mount. These are the options. Another important, so we have unmounting. Unmounting configures the actions to perform. So when a component is unloaded and another component is requested, a component is unloaded and another component is requested. So what happens in this phase is, so actually it includes unsubscribe to methods, events, and clean up the memory. So, and unload, right? All these options will happen. And what is the event here is, event is component will unmount, right? That is the event. Component will unmount. At the time of unmounting, what actions to perform, that you can configure here. These are the basic things. So in component lifecycle, these are the phases. These are the phases. So whenever a component is designed, every component can be configured with these phases. We can define these phases and handle them. Now you can implement this in one small example. And very important, I should tell you here that React, so up to 16, right? Up to 16 version, these hooks are provided. These hooks are provided with class components. In React up to 16 version, these hooks are provided with class component. But what happened is React 16 plus version, right? Version provides lifecycle hooks for function components, right? For function components. But function components hooks are different. Their usage is same, but the way you configure is different. That means component will mount, did mount, all these are related to only class component. Function component don't have this. Then how function component will manage unmount, mount, and all these things, right? That is important. I will tell you, we will discuss that. And these are very popular questions also. That means in almost all recent React interviews, you will find the question, how component unmount, and mount are defined in function component. Actually, we learned already but unmount we have to know. That means it is managed by use effect. Use effect is used to manage the mount and unmount. How it will unmount? How it is going to unmount? That means actually we use the use effect. So how we define use effect? Use effect uses a callback function. Am I right? This callback function have some dependencies. Am I right? It is having some dependencies. Right now, this here defines actions on mount. Defines the actions on mount. Then how do you write actions on unmount? It will use return. Return uses a callback function. Understood? It uses a callback function. Here what we do is, in this callback function, we will define the actions to perform. This is return, right? In this return, we define actions. So define actions on unmount. So unmount and mount are configured in the same use effect. Use effect is used for both mount as well as unmount. And function components comes with a lot of new hooks. So many new hooks are there. I will explain them. We will discuss one by one, level by level. We will go into that. But first, if you want to try component did mount, component will mount, component update, and all these things, you should have good knowledge of class. That means you can try that on class components only. Others we need to see later. For example, I will just give one small example. See here. First, we will see mount, how that mount feature works, right? One small example I will show you. Actually, for that, so in this example now here, yeah, let's create a component cycle. Yeah. npm start, right? Let's create a component. So I'm just giving here a component, add a new component. So life cycle demo. lifecycle demo dot js. Okay, let's write here. The logic is export default. So class, because class component we have to define what is the class life cycle demo. This extends react dot component, right? Then it has to render, am I right? So render and return some container, some div. Now here we are configuring some state. I'm just configuring some state. That means we have a constructor configured. So with properties, props, and super props. So we need to define this. Now see here, we have, okay, life cycle, this is done. I'm creating another class here. So this is the class, and I'm giving as, this is a class we will use internally. In this, we will configure internally. And this is the class we are configuring as, suppose, success component. Success component, this extends react dot component. React dot component. This is another class, success component. And this success component is rendering, and it is returning. So it is written, yeah. It is rendering and it is returning, right? Yeah. So what it is returning here, so I will put a heading success, login success. That is the success component. Okay, similarly, one more class. You can create in separate files also. And here I will put, this is error component. And I will say some invalid login. Okay, we have success component, we have error component. Now here I am defining some data list, data term, some username. So, and data definition input type is equal to text. And here we have data term password, and data definition input type is equal to password. Okay, and here you can use all the forms concept. Just I am using traditional approach. Here we have a button. Button is login. That is the life cycle demo component we are having, right? Now here what the concept is, I will define state. Already we learned this dot state is an object. This contains, I will put user details. User details is an object. This user details object contains username as John underscore NIT, and password as John @11, like this. And we will use another one, form details. Form details will have username. So this is empty currently, and form details password is also empty. So we have user details and form details. Now what happens when user enters the username and password? We have to verify with these details. Are they matching or not? We have to verify. So we will first collect this. That means we need to configure a method here. So the method is, we need to define handle username, right? And what we have to do, we have to collect the event argument, am I right? So, and we have to use this dot set state. Into that state, we have a user details, no, form details. Form details is an object, right? Into the form details object, what we have to get? Username. Username we have to get e dot target dot value. And we have to get, so password we have to get from event dot, not event, this is this dot state dot, what is it, password, right? Not password directly, it is set dot user details, huh? So this is form details. Form details have an option called password, because what you entered in text box we have to collect it, text boxes. Now similarly, so that is the field you are configuring, this dot set state, yeah. And the same I will give again, handle password, handle password. So here we have to get, so this dot state dot form details dot what, password, sorry, name, username, and here it is event dot target dot value. We have to collect the value entered in that. Now already I told you, if you are using state for events in class, you have to bind them in the constructor, na? That means this dot handle username is equal to this dot handle username dot bind with this. Similarly, this dot handle password, this dot handle password dot bind dot this. This already we learned. Now see what we are doing here. We are using the login click also we have to do. That means here we have to use on change. On change is equal to this dot handle username. So here on change is this dot handle password. And we need login click also to handle. That means what we have to do. So handle login click. On login click, what we need to do, we have to verify the form details are matching with user details or not. The form details are matching with the user details or not, we need to verify. That means what we have to do, so we need to write a condition. If now one more we will do here, in this I will declare another MSG, or I will put here result. Okay, result is a string type state. Now what I will do is, below this login I will keep a container div, and here I will print that this dot state dot what it is, result. Now here I am writing the condition on click. If this dot state dot form details dot username is matching with this dot state dot user details dot username. Understood? That means in user details already we have some details. Is it matching with the form details? User details should match as well as, and this dot, so state dot form details dot password is matching with this dot state dot user details dot password. If username and password both are matching with what you entered verified with the user details. That means you see here, this is what you entered. This is already what it is there. You are verifying whether they are matching with that or not. If they are matching, what should happen? If they are matching, then this dot result, am I right? This dot state dot result. Into this, I want to render a component called login component. Sorry, not login component. Which one? We will render a success component. This is conditional rendering. I told you, na, conditional rendering means according to situation, we will decide which component to render. That means we are rendering a success component if it is matching. Otherwise, what should happen? Else what should happen? This dot state dot result. Into that result, I have to render which component? Error component. I have to render the error component. That means we designed already here error component and success. We designed already error component and success component. See the interesting part here. Now we'll write the life cycle. That means success component here. One more is there here. That login click also you have to bind because it is using state na. Handle login click is equal to this dot handle login click dot bind with this. Otherwise it cannot use the state, right? So here for success component, I am giving here the life cycle hook component did mount. Component did mount. I am using component did mount. Component did mount method I am writing. Alert I am giving here success component will render. Am I right? I will give this message success component will render. We will use success component will render. I am using another option component will unmount. Here I will write an alert saying that success component will unmount. Am I right? Success component will render, success component will unmount. Right? So that means this I am doing copy. I am just writing mounting and unmounting. Copy the same and keep it for error also. For error also, this is error component will render and error component will unmount. Error component will unmount. Okay. Now let's keep this in the startup. What is it? Life cycle demo. That is in the startup. Let's run this. It's compiling. Yeah. Yeah. Now I have this. Let's keep it little better. Yeah. So class name I will use container. Okay. Now you see here, I'm entering username. I'm entering some username, some David, some password. I click on login. Then it should render that component and display. Some problem is there. A handle login click we haven't given. Yes, for button we have to define what? On click. On click is this dot handle login click. Okay, I missed it. Fine. Now you see here, I'm refreshing this. Yeah, I entered some name and I entered some wrong password. I clicked on login, then it should alert some problem, anything. Is it working or not? Just I will put an alert. Just will test that alert working or not. Okay, it's working. Means some rendering issue is there. Huh? So what is it? By default, if I say error component here, Okay, fine. It is working. Error component into this. Here conditionally it is not rendering a verifying username details, state, result. This is not result. We have to use set state, na? Right? This dot set state. Set state into the set state. What is the component? What is that result? Result. Into that result, we have to give success component. This we have to do. I'm just applying. It is not just applying. It has to render in this way, right? This is which component? Error component. Because it is a state value, na? So we have to set that by using set state. Okay. You see here, I'm entering some David. I'm entering some password, login. You see, error component will render. Right? Okay. I will say error component will unmount. So, okay. And error component will render, it is rendering it. Now observe carefully. I entered correct password, username. So John underscore NIT. What else I given here? It is John @11. Okay. I'm entering John @11. I'm giving the user ID password correct. Then I click on login. Already invalid is there. Now what will happen here? First step, it will request the success component. After requesting success component, so that success component have to load. Then what it will do is, first it will request success component. After that it will unload login component. Then it will render the success component. You see here when I click login, error component will unmount. Right? When a component will unmount, when you request any another, it will unmount. After unmounting, what will happen? Success component will render. Right? That means success component will unmount later. Right? We'll see. Okay. That means it will render. It will be rendered here. Understood? That means if I entered any wrong details, login, now what will happen? Error component will render. That means success component will unmount first. Whatever the component is currently there, it will unmount. After that, what will happen? Error component will render. Error component will unmount later. That is how it will display. Understood the cycle? That means when a component will unmount, when you requested another. When you requested another component, that means it will unmount the components. This is what we have to manage. That is the cycle actually. That means you requested a new component, the old component will unmount and the new component will come. It will mount, it will render, and it will unmount. These are the phases actually. How such phases are maintained with function components, we have to see, right? That we'll see in next session, right? So in this example I will give. In the next session, we will discuss about how do we work with the function components also. Again, next session will be on Monday, right? Monday we will have the session. Tomorrow, no session. Next session on Monday. Okay, right.